Hello, everyone. So, finally, after three sessions where we largely covered business strategy, how to think like a product manager, what are the different roles, the product development process, and so on, very managerial stuff, right? Now, we are going to slowly move from very strategy level, very high level discussions to very action oriented, very discussion heavy, very hands on related topics. We'll start with user development, one of the most important things that you have to do as a product manager, which is user development. So, without further delay, let's kick off. So, we are going to call it user development. There are multiple terms for this: user research, user development, and so on, customer development as well. But in this particular case, for this particular unit, we're just going to talk about user development. We'll use the term. Okay, we're going to cover introduction. We're going to cover user research methods in brief, and there are about 20 of those that we're going to cover. We're going to cover how to do user research. We'll also figure out how to do user development at warp speed, right? A lot of people complain, a lot of product managers complain that they never get time to actually do user research. And in this particular unit 4.4, I'm going to cover few examples of few ways in which you can do it really, really fast. Then we're going to talk about buyer research and how is it different from user research. And finally, how do you synthesize all your research and you put this together. This is a fairly long presentation, so I hope your bladders are empty and your Red Bulls are full. Okay, let's kick off. So, introduction to user development. Henry Ford supposedly said that if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Well, there's a little debate whether he actually said it or not, but let's give him the benefit of doubt. And Steve Jobs said this about user research: it's really hard to design products by focus groups. A lot of times, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. These two famous quips have caused ample confusion whether user and market research is important or not. Well, Jobs didn't do it. Come straight back when arguments start flying. But experienced product teams value user research as they should, but the new entrants are misled by these statements. And I want to clarify and I want to call off these statements really, really well. While they said that they don't want to, while they have given those statements, but at the same time, what you will slowly realize, and as I reveal, what they said is more likely for the attitudinal side of user research, where people say something else but they do something different. And both these gentlemen were very well known and widely respected for their acumen in observing the behavioral traits of users and not the attitudinal one. What I'm saying versus what I'm doing is vastly different, and what you need to aim for is what am I doing? Okay, what is the user doing? And that's all that matters. So with this out of the way, let's move on to user research and why it is important for a product manager. Okay, let me get something very straight, and this is something which I've seen often happening, and even I have been guilty of doing this. You should talk to customers and users every day, especially when you're starting off. You should do that every single day. Spend at least half an hour. Volunteer to be a customer support agent for half an hour. Just talk, or at least just overhear what the customer support agents are doing. If you cannot really do it immediately because somebody is not allowing you to take up the support role, but you should talk to customers and users every day, at least half an hour. With this exercise, you are trying to learn who to build for and not what to build, right? So in user development and doing all this exercise, you're just trying to understand who to build for. Okay, and once you understand that, a lot of times that itself will give you an answer of what to build and what not to build. So user research is an overarching technique critical to product development decision making. It just helps you in making good sound decisions. Okay, why user research? Because user research has a unique distinction. Everyone advocates its importance, but very few actually do it because it is time consuming to do user research. The outcomes are very difficult to interpret, and also to indicate whether they were really measurable or did they actually gave some results? And with so many techniques available, it is complicated. Okay, as you will realize that there's so many methods available that it gets very complicated as to क्या करें क्या ना करें क्या pick करें क्या ना pick करें, right? And I'm going to give you some techniques, and I'm going to demystify this entire game into something which you can immediately get, get your hands dirty with. There are a few other examples, a few other quotes given by some experts and some not so experts in the industry, but I've just put it out there so that you get a sense of what people believe user research is. Okay, so user development is the first phase on the life cycle of a new feature or product. Once the research is done, so we are starting up with research. Once the research is done, product definition, implementation, launch, and evaluation is implemented. Okay. So, for those still wondering why user research is discussed more now than ever before, consider how diverse users are today, right? Even within a homogeneous demographic, the needs and demands of users vary from one person to another. Use cases are evolving over time, and new services continue to disrupt existing models. All this is because pain points and needs of users, earlier unexplored, are becoming more visible and plain. There are numerous methods and techniques available to do user research depending on the goal of the research. Okay. So in this research phase, you're going to discover the customer or the user. You're going to discover their problems, and finally, you're going to understand the user needs, behaviors, and current ways of working. That's your entire goal in the research phase, which is the user research phase. Okay, and because now more and more people are getting connected to the internet and mobile, that's why it's way more important to do user research now. You can imagine 20 years back, almost all the people who were online, you can imagine that they were all techies, all innovators. They would fall in the innovators bracket, and they were all techies. They were all adventurers, all explorers, right? So it was very easy to actually put them in a single bucket and build a product for them, right? But now with so many diverse set of audiences joining the bandwagon, it is very very important that you crystallize and you pinpoint precisely whom you're targeting and whom you're building for. Okay, why do we need this? We need to do this because we have our own biases, assumptions, and perspectives as users or as product managers. We have our own biases, assumptions, and perspectives, right? We are not our own users, even though you might be using or you might be using the product in a certain way, but it might not be applicable for everyone because you are coming with your own nurture, with your own, practice of using digital products. So we need to design for them, that is, the users, and not for ourselves. Only then their needs will be fulfilled. So don't be mistaken. For example, in this course, I could have taken the tutorial myself, but that would not help. That would not have helped you, right? Because I have my own biases and my own blind spots. And if I had I known them, then there would not be blind spots, right? So that's why you need another tutor. That's why you need another expert, so that my blind spots or my biases can be covered for you. And why user research? Because every single user persona brings their own. You'll learn about user persona very soon. So every single user come with their own goals, their own attitudes, their own motivations. They have their own mental models, relationships, pain points, environment, processes, and so on. Right? Everything is unique for every single user, right? And that's why you need to build for that particular user. I hope guys recognize these two characters. And while they have the same motivation in a way, but they're coming with completely different nurtures, and that's why their actions, their reactions, their words, their motivations are completely different. Secondly, if you design for everyone, you're going to make no one happy. The product is going to come out very shitty, which I'm sure guys would have seen in a lot of websites which try to please everyone and that turns out to be very shitty. Right? Take these examples. When you design for specific type of users, if you want to make a cycle, then make a bicycle, bat cycle. If you want to make a bat mobile or bat bike, I don't know what it is called, but whatever you call it, If you make it specifically, if you're making a bike, you get a bike, correct, and not some random contraption which you would call a bike or a Batmobile, whatever. Correct. So how do you do user research? Very broadly put, you determine what types of users we serve with research. Okay. What kind of research? I'll explain this in very soon. We analyze that research to find segments of user types. What kind of segments, what kind of users exist. Okay. And each type of user is represented by a model or archetype. Remember the term archetype. Okay. You will hear about this a lot. Okay. This archetype. And a specific instance of this model is called a persona. ठीक है. So हमने research किया, we research किया हमने across a certain user cross section. Out of this cross section, then we determine what are the segments, what are the common traits that we are identifying, what are the segments that matter for us. Correct. So segments could be, for example, you could slice and dice against geography, you can slice and dice against age, you can slice and dice against gender, against a certain product type. There's so many segmentation that you can do. Whatever works for you, just make sure that whatever segment you're doing, it is statistically significant. That is, segment करते करते अगर दो लोग बच जाते हैं, 50 लोग बच जाते हैं, it might not be very valuable for you, because you know that 50 people का corpus might not, I mean, the results that you're going to borrow from that 50 people might not be applicable for the entire audience that fall in that segment, right? So make sure that it is big enough, it is large enough. Each type of user is represented by a model or archetype. Okay, this archetype I will explain very soon. And a specific instance of this model is called a persona. Let's deal with these two things right now. Let's clarify these two things immediately. So, what are archetypes? So, archetypes are broad models or stereotypes, very crudely put, okay, which represent a whole set of people. So, for example, the hero in almost all of these movies, Star Wars, Harry Potter, Matrix, or whatever, that character is more or less human in character, though through whom the world destiny is realized, right? Then there is an enemy, the great and conspicuous in the seat of power. Voldemort, Darth Vader, the Matrix, Sauron, or Darla, right? Then there's a guardian. Then there's a shapeshifter. There's a trickster, right? There's a comic relief to offset the dramatic tension. So you can see there is a common set of stereotypes or archetypes that you can see in across different movies, right? So these are archetypes, and you'll create such archetypes for your entire audience, from for your entire segment of users. And from this archetype, for example, in this scenario, right, Harry Potter is a persona. Luke Skywalker is a persona. Neo is a persona. So it's an exact embodiment of that model. That hero as an archetype, who will have a characteristic of being very noble, very initially very unclear about his destiny, but slowly realizing that yeah, he is the one who has to free the world and get the world to its destiny. Slowly understands and slowly figures out, and takes on the responsibility that he was given, right? So Neo becomes a persona because you can exactly understand that ये character है, इसकी ये backstory है, ये this is how he is evolving and so on, right? That is persona. So right, personas are a specific instance of archetypes that represent groups of real users who have similar attributes. Okay, so each persona serves as a single surrogate for many actual users, which produces a clear target to aim for. So when you get a persona, so if I just give you, imagine the developer or designer, if we just give you this description that we are designing for, or we are building for a hero kind of character, you will not be able to create, if you are the costume designer of, let's say, these movies, for example, and I just gave you this description, it will not help you, right? It will just not help you. It will give you some sense, but it will not give you a clear picture. But as soon as I tell you that, okay, our hero is a teenager who lives in a foster home, um, who is confused, and he is not loved or liked by the foster family, and we give a background, they give an entire character, what's the age, what's the demographic, what does he like, what he doesn't like, what is he afraid of, what does he like, what does he like to eat, and so on. Then you can actually paint a much clearer picture of Harry Potter or Neo or Frodo or Marlin or whatever that is. Correct? So that is the role of persona. When you get a persona, then you can exactly know, okay, I'm building a product for Harry Potter. So I can imagine what kind of design, what kind of UX, what kind of features I should be adding to my product. Correct? As against just saying that, okay, we are building for enemy or building for shapeshifter. Correct? So that is all about persona. Example persona, for example, here is a HubSpot persona. HubSpot is an inbound marketing tool. Do check it out. It's a pretty fantastic product. So HubSpot being an enterprise product, they can have an owner, Ollie, which is a smallish company with 100 odd employees. He's the owner of business. He started business with own capital, helps with sales, finance, marketing, HR, and so on, so on. Right? There's another one where there's a female marketing Mary who works in a company which is pretty large, 100 to 2,000 employees. She's the director VP of marketing, 10 plus years marketing experience. So once you get this kind of persona details, then you start getting a sense of what am I building for, who am I building for, right? So needs reports to show to the CEO, right? So I can imagine that if I'm building for this persona, then I need to prepare some features where I can show the reports to the CEO. There's a method to extract reports from the system, right? Look up personas online. You'll find a lot of such examples, right? Similarly, enterprise Erin, director of marketing operations, VP marketing, large company, 2,000 odd employees, marketing team of 15 plus, and so on. 30 married recently, and so on, right? So now you can really exactly identify what are the goals, what are the challenges, and you can clearly design or give a clear aim to target, right? And by the way, this owner Ollie, marketing Mary, and enterprise Erin, this is the name of the archetypes in this particular case, right? What personas are not, they're not market segments. I'll clarify very soon that market research, how market research and user research is different. In this particular case, market segments doesn't reflect what personas are. Okay, persona is a specific instance of a model or an archetype. Okay, it is not your stereotypes that it's a Madrasi or it's a Gujarati or a Punjabi or an American. No, it's not an average user either. It's not a role. It's nothing. It's a specific instance. You will exactly articulate that there's a female Jane who's 29 years old. She loves to use Instagram all the time. So before eating any lunch, she's going to click a picture and so on. You exactly clarify what are the goals, what are the demographics. You cover every single detail. It's as granular. I mean, obviously, it depends on what kind of product you're building and how much time and how many resources you have. But you'll go as deep as possible. You will exactly etch it out so that there's a clear picture in the mind of designers, of product managers, of developers that who are we building for, and that is personas. Okay. You would typically cover demographic, which is age, gender, education, address, etc. Behavior, the hobbies, TV shows, movies, favorite actor, topics of interest, what have you, whatever works for you, whatever needs to be covered, right? Goals. What are the what are the goals that this person works for or lives for? He or she wants fame. He wants iron throne. He wants to make money, right? And what are the things that he wants to sacrifice for? Sacrifice to achieve these goals. He doesn't mind spending because he's filthy rich, or he doesn't mind working extra hard. So with this behind us, let's understand what is the difference between market research versus user research. Let's clarify this right away because they're not same. So market research is usually designed for improving upon something that already exists, while user research is usually designed to innovate upon something that we are working on. Okay. Market research is usually opinion driven, so you get the opinion of people and you try to work upon it. While user research, you are focusing on users' needs and you're observing their behavior, their mental models, and so on. So it's more behavior driven. You're trying to focus on you're trying to focus on the behavior of the users. right? So in user research, you're focusing on the behavior of the audience of the user and not on the opinion of the audience. I'm sorry. Yeah. So market research involves using the data from your product and customers to understand that particular market segment, what others in it are doing, and how your sales or marketing strategies are working. Okay? So whatever data you already have from your product, you use that to understand your market segment better. Okay. From a product perspective, if you're doing market research, from the product perspective, the best it gives you is understanding how to make things better for what is already working. जो काम कर रहा है अच्छे से उसको better कैसे करें, improve कैसे करें, ठीक है? User research looks for a user's needs, tools, mental models, etc., and uncovers why their behavior in relation to the product is the way it is. Okay, why are they using the way they are using their product? Okay, user research actually looks for issues that are affecting users, which in turn propels innovation in order to solve those issues. I hope that is very clear, right? So improve market research focuses on कि use कैसे हो रहा है sorry, it focuses on market segments and understanding from the data itself that from a product perspective it just helps you understand how to make things better for what is already working जो काम कर रहा है जबकि यूजर रिसर्च में you are focused on understanding why people are using the way they are using and then innovate on top of that. ठीक है? So for example, go to training, the app that we use, it was initially named as go to meeting, right? So it started off as go to meeting, and people started using it for go to meetings, and going to meetings, going to online meetings, and soon enough, when the company started observing that a lot of people are actually using their product for also training, for training purposes, they actually expanded, they innovated, and they created a go to training separate module. Okay, and then they also created go to webinar because a lot of their customers were actually using it for webinar purposes. So they designed go to meeting separately for meeting driven use case, go to training for training driven purposes, and go to webinar for the webinar related issues, right? And that came in because of the user research they did it, right? So market research is opinion driven, user research is behavior driven. Let's keep the things very clear. If you're just focusing on market research, you are headed towards an echo chamber where you are just hearing your customers for partial validation, but not really listening to what they need. User research done right moves products towards what customers need, not what they ask for. Right? So opinion driven or attitudinal driven versus behavior driven. You'll very soon understand the difference between these two things and what tools to use for these two scenarios. Okay. So let's get started. I'll start with how do you start small and fast, and then we'll go extremely granular. So very simple product market strategy framework, very simple 5 steps in almost sounds like common sense. You identify the target user. So you broadly have a sense that, okay, let's say for example, we are targeting, let's say we're targeting, uh, let me imagine a nice little product. Uh, let's say Shazam for shoes. Okay. Shazam for shoes. So if you find good shoes, you just click the picture, and the app quickly told you that where did like which brand this product is from, where you can buy, and so on. Let's say that is the product. So you will identify the target user. Obviously, the target user is somebody who loves shoes. Now, between male and female, if I'm just starting off, I would I will believe that females are a little more likely to use this product. Correct. Males also love shoes, but then again, females are more likely to use this kind of product because they love more, shoes a little more. There's a more there's a higher propensity. Correct. So identify the target users that broadly females would use. Who would use? Perhaps urban audiences would love it a little more. Correct. So I'll start triangulating basis whatever information I have. Then you will determine the differentiating features that you can create for these users. Okay, then you'll figure out the table stakes feature, that is the core feature. What should go in this particular product so that this at least works and people will give it a shot. Okay, then you use the research to identify feature gaps and quality deficiencies. Okay, you'll very soon realize figure out how to do this. And then you prioritize based on maximum impact. Now impact can be quantified in terms of revenues, in terms of users, growth, blah blah blah, a lot of ways. We'll get to that in some time. Okay, so identify, then determine the differentiating features, then determine out of these features which are the table stakes features, what are the core features without which that's like a do or die features, right? Then use the research to identify feature gaps and quality deficiencies, and then prioritize based on maximum impact. Typically, the 2, 3, 4 steps are also done in iteration at times if you have the time. 2, 3, 4 are done in loops because you do the research, you identify something more, then you want to do a little more research to really nail down and so on. Sometimes it happens, not all the time, right? So how do you do research? Let's not get into the technicalities of it very much. Let's just start with very simple, very simple examples. Okay. So think about each question as a separate test, right? So I recommend, like most things, start small. Pick one thing to test and make changes to. Okay. Like in chemistry experiments, if you remember, you change the quantity of just one chemical to measure the rate of reaction, right? So in titration, for example, एक drop change हुआ, एक drop change हुआ, and color change हुआ, and you have identified कि okay, इतना this is titration is successful, correct? Similarly, you should design your experiments which allow you to observe the behavior basis the change in just one variable. Just move one variable, nothing else. If you don't do it, it will become very difficult to exactly triangulate what is impacting and by how much it is impacting, right? And think carefully about the questions you want to get answered, and think about each question as a separate test. For example, I've got plenty of app downloads, but not many first uses, right? As in, people are downloading, but not everybody is using it, or not many people are using it. So why is that, right? Um, the AOE for product X is down this month, but why, right? Our retention numbers are up, very good, awesome, but we didn't change anything, so we don't know why is that happening, right? So if you look at it, every single thing has just one metric and nothing else, correct? How quickly can customers get through the checkout process, which is basically how many steps or how much time is it taking, correct? Then pick the right testing method and outcome. So consider what type of information you would need to get the right answer, or get a better sense of why is it happening. So there are three directions or three uh, dimensions in which you can think. One is attitudinal versus behavioral, or opinion oriented versus behavior oriented. Attitudinal is what people say. वो बोलेंगे हाँ हमें अच्छा लगता है हम तो खरीदेंगे, but are they actually buying, right? Are they actually buying? And that is what people do versus what people say. As a product manager, you're always focusing on behavioral attitudes, behavioral traits, and not the attitudinal traits. Okay, qualitative versus quantitative. So qualitative is why or how. Quantitative is how many or how much, and context of use. Right? Is it natural? As in, is the product being used in its natural habitat the way it is supposed to be used, or is it a scripted use? For example, you asked a friend of yours to test out your app right now. So because you are hovering over his head, he is using it in a very artificial environment. Right? That is scripted use, or is not even using the product, right? So you should pick whatever works best for you and your users, and you may need to use more than one tool or technique. Remember that. Okay. uh, just to touch upon the attitudinal behavior, because it's the most fundamentally most important concept and very hard to apply, right? So for example, when Ford or Jobs said that unless and until you show it to them, they will not know what they want, right? uh, it is usually true for disruptive innovations, things that people had not even imagined. Correct. So, for example, if you just reflect upon what Ford had said, that people would have asked for faster horses, What does that mean? If you really drill down, what does it mean? The way I see it is when he said people would have asked for faster horses. What it means is people definitely want to move from point A to point B in a faster manner. They want to reach faster. अब वो horse से होगा because people have just seen horses, so that's why they could only relate with horses. Correct? But faster, if you just focus on instead of remove horse from the entire quote, and then suddenly the quote becomes. I'll just take you back to that particular quote quickly because it's such a fundamental thing, right? If you just remove horse here, what do you get? If I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster something or a faster way of reaching the destination. Correct? Now वो horse से होता है कि किसी और से होता है? Remember the carrier of value, right? So carrier of value could have been anything else, right? But because people just know horse, they said horse because that is the structure that they had in mind. Correct? And that is a fundamental thing. The faster, because Ford was a genius, he was able to see faster as the keyword and not horse as the keyword. Correct? Similarly, Jobs has done this ample number of times. For example, the iPod, right? He saw that the people were transferring music from here to there, and he identified that it was painful to actually transfer songs, a lot of songs together, and people wanted to carry a lot of songs, right? So that at that time when Walkman was very popular and digital music, carrying music digitally was not so popular, he invented iPod, right? Because he identified that as a metric. And there are tons of such examples where he actually looked at the behavioral traits, and that is what they're trying to mean. Although these quotes have been misrepresented in a lot of ways, a lot of times. Jumping back, so pick the right testing method and outcome. Okay, so attitudinal versus behavioral, that's one way to look at it. Qualitative versus quantitative, that's tier two, and tier three is context of use. You can obviously layer these tiers or one over the other. Or you can just use one exclusively. It's up to you and what do you need in that particular scenario. Uh, as regard to the tools or the different methodologies, you will very soon understand what is unmoderated usability tools and so on. You'll get to know that very soon. But for the moment, just understand that there are certain tools which have very low barrier to entry, while certain methods have very barrier to entry. Let me give an example. So lab-based usability testing would obviously be very high because you need to get people in the lab and then do the usability testing, right? So obviously there's a very high barrier to entry, very difficult to conduct. Similarly, diary or camera studies, you'll know what this is very soon. Focus groups are also very difficult to conduct. As compared to this, Google Analytics is very easy, right? You just have to plug in just 2 lines of JavaScript code and you're done. Correct? Similarly, conducting surveys are also very simple because you just have to design the survey and plug in a JavaScript code and you're done. Correct? And then people will keep coming back to your site and they will give it their surveys and whoever is interested in doing it. Correct? So there's a difference in the complication or the effort that it takes to do this user research methods. So you need to figure out what is the right testing method out of this entire game. Right? So pick the questions first, that what do I need to test and how many tests I need to run. And then you figure out कि उस test के basis पे what do I need to look for. Okay? And then measure the change. Okay? You measure the change. How do you do that? Very simple. You set the baseline. So आज की डेट में क्या, you need to have a baseline set, otherwise तुम्हारे रिसर्च में कोई फायदा नहीं होगा. You set the baseline, you measure basis the previous testing, whatever you've done, and then you compare with the baseline. Okay, once you've done that, then you figure out कि जो भी outcome आया है, what does it impact? Is it impacting the heart? Things that are decided largely by heart, things that are decided largely by head or by wallet. So, for example, brand loyalty, right? So brand loyalty is largely a heart thing, not a head thing, right? It's an irrational notion. Brand loyalty, what does it even mean? Correct? Customer satisfaction or inclusivity, right? Similarly, potential increase in revenue, correct? So you do this, you figure out the outcomes of this entire exercise so that you can convince the other stakeholders, whether it's business stakeholders or whether it is developers or designers whom you want to showcase that see if we do this small tweak, this is the outcome that we can achieve. Now, depending on whom you're talking to, whether it's a sales oriented or revenue oriented CEO, obviously you don't have to bother about heart or head. You just have to bother about potential increase in revenue, because that is the language that we will understand. Correct? While if somebody is very pragmatic, very prudent about how he takes decisions, business stakeholder or a developer, you just have to give him, let's say, start with the data. We have a problem, but we don't know why, and that's why we need to do this uh, experiment, right? So an important tip here is to make sure the testing method and output match. So for example, don't measure happiness with A/B test. Correct? It's very important to relate these two things. Happiness is a qualitative thing. So A/B testing is, while A/B testing is a quantitative method, right? It is used for quantitative metrics like conversion. So you cannot measure A/B testing with, I mean, A/B test and happiness doesn't go together, right? Happiness qualitative, A/B testing is for quantitative things. Lastly, once you have measured and compared with baseline, once you've related it, this will help you in getting your stakeholders onboarded. That's one way of doing things. Or second is you simply record few videos of users using your product and share them with internal stakeholders. Why do you need to do all this? Simply because a lot of times internal stakeholders are not convinced, right? In fact, a lot of you would have faced this problem where a lot of product decisions got done purely because of the gut feel of the CEO or the top management, right? So doing this exercise, this simple, smart, small exercise, picking a question, picking up one of the methods, and then doing a quick um the research exercise, you will get a certain answer which you can either show to the internal stakeholders and show them that, see, our product is shitty, or if we do this, we'll be able to make much more money, or we'll be able to improve customer satisfaction. They'll be convinced and they will give you the resources that is required, resources of time or whatever. Okay. Right? So this is getting started, and you need to start small and fast. How you can get started. And hopefully, this will remove the inertia that typically plagues the entire game of doing user research. Okay, let's talk about user research methods. We have been talking about this over and over again. It's about time to dive deep. So, user research methods, there are about 20 of them, okay, which we are going to cover in this particular context. There were 20 of them, and they cover everything, right from interviews to clickstream analysis. And we're going to cover each one of them one by one. Right? So, as you can imagine, it is impractical and unreasonable to apply all the methods to a given problem at hand. At the same time, it is not advisable to just use one method alone, right? Unless the insight is too solid to warrant another method. Like you've got some solid insight which is undisputable, then obviously it doesn't require that you need to do another testing. But that is rare; that it doesn't happen most of the time, right? So let's dive into these methods. So there is one dimension which you can see: behavioral and attitudinal, correct? And the other dimension is qualitative versus quantitative, right? So attitudinal versus behavioral. I've already covered this, but I'll just cover this once again, just to reinforce. So often what people say is very different from what people do. And the methods in the dimension help you to differentiate. What people say is typically connected with their belief system, what they would like to be seen as or perceived as. Right? They would like to be perceived as a very honest, very nice person. But when the time comes, that same person is going to cheat as soon as possible. Correct? So, what they believe or want to be perceived as. Hence, attitudinal methods are often used by the marketing teams, because that marketing teams are attacking the belief system, that you believe that you love your mother a lot. I mean, we all love our mothers, but well, not everybody has a happy memory, right? So, or we are all nostalgic about our childhood days, right? So, a lot of paperboard attacks our belief system. They don't talk about that. Look, our while you're talking about nostalgia and ghar ka sharbat and ghar ka this and that, but look, our ingredients are all artificial. They will never say that, right? Because they just want you to buy paperboard because, oh my god, I'm nostalgic now. I want to drink a paperboard drink. Correct. So marketing approaches are usually attacking the attitudinal side of things. Okay. So in attitudinal methods, the user self-reports his inclination towards things that he does. So typically surveys, as you can see here, typically surveys, interviews, focus groups, um, participatory design, these kind of things are conducted in the attitudinal side of things. And it obviously ranges from qualitative to quantitative side of things. Okay. Uh, so typically surveys, one-to-one interviews, and mutated version of these two methods form the major chunk of attitudinal methodologies. As you can imagine, in all these methods, user reports the reasons for his actions as per his belief system. Human psyche wants the self to be perceived in a greater form, and hence, even though it may be the price that drives user's decision, he may report quality or some other factor, right? So that he is not perceived as cheap. Who would like to say कि नहीं भैया मेरे को price से ही problem है, right? They will say something else, correct? And this is one of the biggest issues with these methods, and that's why for a product manager, this is not an area where you should focus too much. But in certain cases, this is useful. I'll explain that in some time. As against this, behavioral methods focus on understanding the hobbies, actions, and underlying reasons behind users' actions. Okay, it lays very little, if any, importance on what user says. It is largely behavioral. कर क्या रहा है बंदा? बोलने दो जो भी करना है, लेकिन अंत में after talking about all the safety and security and this and that, if he, as soon as he walks away from the interview, he immediately spits on the road or he immediately throws a plastic bottle, that shows his actual behavior, not the attitude, right? A thing that we have seen often in our politicians. Uh, so if we look at the Ford's quote, like I mentioned, right, faster horse, and give him the benefit of doubt that people would have actually asked for faster horses, we can observe that the key behavioral point is fast, correct? Like I already mentioned. While the attitudinal inclination is still horse, since that is the easy mental model of a transportation medium that user readily have, correct? Great product managers can identify such subtleties, correct? And actually देखा जाए तो फोर्ड ने उनको faster horse ही दिया, right? Instead of one horsepower, they were, I think, I don't remember what was the power of the first T model, but I can imagine that it will be at least higher than a few horses, right? And I strongly believe that when Jobs said that the users don't know what they want, he really meant that to build great products, you need to observe their behavior and not rely on what they say, right? And that is why everyone hated transferring and carrying around songs, which became the core value behind iPod. Correct. So while product managers benefit heavily from behavioral methods, but attitudinal methods have their own space on the shelf. So, for example, there's a technique called card sorting. Okay, I'll explain that in some time. So, card sorting provides insights about users' mental model of an information space. So, for example, uh, how a person sorts a certain information. Let's say, for example, um, uh, when you're designing, very simply put, when you're designing, let's say the menu bar or what should go in the menu of a website, and a typical user is given all the menu items that can potentially go there in a set of cards. Okay, each menu item written in a card. So the user is then sorting those cards as per his understanding of how the information, how all these menu items should go, where should they go, where should they file in. सेकंड ईयर में क्या होगा, प्राइमरी आइटम्स कौन सी होंगी, सेकेंडरी आइटम्स कौन सी होंगी, टर्शियरी आइटम्स कौन सी होंगी, एंड सो ऑन. So that gives you a very good insight into users' mental model of an information space and can help determine the best information architecture for your product. Correct? Application or website. Surveys measure and categorize attitudes or collect self reported data that can help track or discover important issues to address. ठीक है. So surveys से आपको you get to measure and categorize attitudes कि बंदा बोल क्या रहा है, उसको क्या what is his attitude towards certain things, correct? And this self reported data can help you track or discover the important issues, and that's why NPS is scored. NPS is measured using surveys, for example. Focus groups tend to be less useful for usability purposes for a variety of reasons, but provide a top of the mind view of what people think about a brand or product concept in a group setting. ग्रुप में लोग एक प्रोडक्ट के बारे में क्या बोल रहे हैं, दैट इज द ओनली बेनिफिट ऑफ, टू बी वेरी ऑनेस्ट, ऑफ अ फोकस ग्रुप. ठीक है, we'll come to focus group very soon. So card sorting is here. You can see somewhere in between of qualitative and quantitative. Okay, and focus groups is sits right here because it's a largely a qualitative approach, and it largely talks about what people are saying about a certain product or certain brand. Okay. On the other end of this dimension, methods that focus mostly on behavior, which is this one, this entire section, right? Seek to understand what people do with the product or service in question. So, for example, this A/B testing presents changes to a site's design to random samples of site visitors. Okay. But attempts to hold all else constant. So सिर्फ एक चीज चेंज की या कॉपी चेंज कर दिया बटन चेंज कर दिया कलर चेंज कर दिया कुछ चीजें मूव कर दी इधर से उधर right so in order this helps in understanding the effect of different site design choices on behavior while eye tracking this is another thing eye tracking seeks to understand how users visually interact with interface design. So, are they scrolling too much? Where is the eye going? Left जा रही है, right जा रही है. अगर left right जा रही है तो क्यों जा रही है? What is that information on the left side because of which the user is going in that direction or trying to see in that direction? What is he trying to find? Correct. Another thing that you can see here is the green dot and the red dot. So green dot is natural use of product, as in the user is using the product naturally. Okay. While scripted is often the lab-based use of product. So I'll call some users to a lab or to an office, or I would be going to their location and getting the product used in front of me or in a recorded manner. Okay. While the triangle yellow is decontextualized, that is not using the product. So you can imagine in an interview, the person is not using the product at that moment. You're just asking questions around the product or around the problem that the product is solving. Correct. There's another version, and finally a combination or hybrid of these few things. I'll explain some of them very soon. Correct. And so between these two extremes lies the two most popular methods that we use: usability studies and field studies. Usability studies is you try to understand how people are using your product and what are the issues they are facing. And field studies, you actually go out on the field and you try to figure out what are the problems that users are facing. So they utilize a mixture of self-reported and behavioral data and can move toward either end of this dimension, though leaning towards the behavior side is generally recommended, as you can imagine, right? Just to spend a little more time on behavioral or attitudinal, sorry, I would like to spend a little more time on qualitative versus quantitative. So the distinction between these two methods go deeper than the dictionary meaning of these two terms. Okay, qualitative is not open-ended subjective survey response, and quantitative is not reporting of numbers just. Okay, just want to demystify this a little more. But qualitative methods are a study of users' attitudes and behaviors directly. Okay? And quantitative methods are a study of users' attitudes and behaviors indirectly. So via tools like surveys and analytics. So quantitative method is usually very indirect. आपको indirectly उस data मिल रहा है, like A/B testing से clickstream analysis से. Clickstream analysis is basically Google Analytics in a way. ठीक है, clicks जो हो रहे हैं उनका एक stream आ रहा है, that's why it's called clickstream. And then if you analyze that clickstream data, then you get a sense of who is clicking what. So that is clickstream analysis, right? And qualitative is typically you're getting the answer from the user directly. You can see interviews हो रहे हैं, focus groups हो रहे हैं, so you're directly getting the answer from the horse's mouth, pretty much, right? So in field studies and usability studies, for example, the researcher directly observes how people use technology or not to meet their needs. This gives them the ability to ask questions, probe or behavior, or possibly even adjust the study protocol to better meet your objectives. Analysis of this data is usually not mathematical, it's usually very subjective. Okay. Uh, by contrast, insights in quantitative methods are typically derived from mathematical analysis, right? Since the instrument of data collection, चाहे वो survey tool हो, चाहे web server का log हो, so web server का log is another method of doing quantitative analysis. So they capture a large amount of data that are then easily coded or decoded numerically. Right. So, example, clickstream analysis. Like every single click that is happening is getting recorded, and then some like Google Analytics case में Google is doing all the number crunching to give you some answers as to who came from where, What did he do after reaching a site? What did he click on? What did he not click on? And so many other things. Okay. So due to nature of these differences, qualitative methods are much better suited for answering questions about why or how to fix a problem. Right? Qualitative methods are better suited for how or why to fix a problem. Whereas quantitative methods give you a much better job answering how many and how much type of questions. You getting my sense? So qualitative is very subjective, or why and क्यों करना चाहिए, कैसे करना चाहिए, and so on. Quantitative is more connected with कितना impact पड़ेगा. So you can imagine now that you need a healthy balance of these two things. Only then you will be able to convince yourself and others why a certain change or why a certain product is necessary. Because you've got a good answer why and how, and then you've also got the impact using quantitative methods. Correct? So having such numbers will help you prioritize resources as well. Obviously, right? So broadly put, this I mean, when you're doing research across a landscape, right? So depending on which quadrant or where you lie, you will have to ask different kind of questions, right? So what people do lies here, okay, which is behavioral side, as you can see. Correct, is behavioral. And what people say is attitudinal. Correct. Why and how to fix is on this side, and how many how much is somewhere on this side. So questions that you need to answer are also going to be, if you're doing some sort of method, if you're using one of the methods lying somewhere here, you will get answers to these kind of questions, what people are doing and by how much they're doing. Okay. So quantitative data are often easier to understand and convey to product teams, right? Because it's all numbers, so it's very easy to understand for product managers typically, right? Especially when it comes to creating visuals and more concrete data graphs. Also, quantitative messages are more easily received by product managers and engineers, who often gravitate towards numbers and concrete findings. However, overlooking or minimizing the use of qualitative data is like forgetting to order, uh, you know, um, I don't know, to order, let's say, popcorn in a movie binge, right? Uh, it's a huge, huge mistake. Qualitative data provides a rich picture of sentiment and opinion, which numbers can't always convey. Correct? If quantitative data are the bones of the structure, qualitative data are the voice and the spirit. So that doesn't change the fact that qualitative data can be difficult to interpret and visualize. Researchers struggle to translate facts that do not come in a clean Likert scale. Likert scale का link मैंने speaker notes में डाला हुआ है. Please have a look. Or task success metric due to a lack of consensus in the standards for how quality data should be judged. So there's no exact methodology that exists right now, or people have agreed to. So people are doing whatever best they know, right? So equally as important, how can a standalone deliverable visually convey feedback when there is no researcher to talk through the bullet points of a user feedback session, right? जैसे word cloud होता है, right? So word cloud is something which is used very very commonly, but researchers themselves hate it. But उसका कोई alternative has not come up yet that people can start using more effectively. So word cloud is something that most of the researchers agree that it is useless. It is just not, it doesn't just convey any point or a point that clearly, but there is no alternative that has come up as yet, right? So one of the alternatives to word cloud, for those who are wondering what is word cloud, you would have seen a bunch of words, कुछ बड़े कुछ छोटे, very commonly in older blogs, right? That is word cloud. So it just gives you a sense of what words are most commonly being used in a certain quanta of words or data of text, you can say, right? So one of the technique to fight against this word cloud is the sentiment score chart. It's a little more involved to build it, but I just want to mention it because and most likely you'll not be using it too often, but I just want to cover this here. So a sentiment score chart is an approach to quantify and visualize qualitative data. It provides a means to understand the emotions users shared during qualitative feedback sessions or open-ended responses on a survey. So by segmenting out these areas in a polarized histogram, you can see the polarized histogram here, visualization, right? Team members can more easily identify the positive and negative portions of their product. This is also used when, for example, when Flipkart or Amazon were building their review product, this sentiment analysis helped them a lot. Okay. So how does it work? So creating a useful sentiment score chart for qualitative analysis requires four steps of data analysis. You start by transcribing the data. Obviously, when you're done a certain amount of survey, let's say it's all it's all video based surveys. Let's say so you have to transcribe first, then you have to categorize, then you have to synthesize, and finally visualize. I'll explain how very soon. So transcription. So in general, all qualitative questions during a user feedback session should be transcribed. Okay. The key is to avoid abridged notes or general assessments, but instead to literally transcribe sessions word for word. Beyond inhibiting a game of telephone that can dilute through the product team, full transcription is also a good practice as it makes the notes from feedback sessions much more useful and searchable. Okay. For those cringing at the thought of transcribing heaps of interviews and open responses, try investing in transcription shortcuts such as there are plenty of tools now that you can use. I've given some links here in the speaker notes. A transcription service or the age-old technique of getting the interns or to do the transcription. Uh, at OYO, for example, we simply used transcription software that allowed the transcribers to slow audio speed and transcribe as we go along. Okay. Uh, I tried using some of the Google and some of the other tools that were there, but they didn't give very accurate results. So ultimately, आपको फिर से पूरा check करना ही पड़ता था, which was a pain. So that's why we used to simply do it by ourselves. But before handing it off to an intern or to give it to anybody else, do give it a try. So do give it a word for word note. एक बार खुद से करके देखो, it is a very interesting experience and can help researchers practice active listening when they're not the one conducting the interview. कई बार ऐसा भी होता है when you're doing this interviews, one person you would be the one who is taking notes while the other person is taking asking questions, and the roles can also switch, right? So it's very important to figure out or understand what does it take to have an active listening, and we in general have become very very actively disconnected. हमारा we are not very active listeners anymore, right? So you have to hone that skill. When somebody is talking, you need to make sure that you're listening properly, you're understanding things as they speak. Once the transcription is complete, it's time to categorize the data, which is the second step, categorization, right? And you start. So basically, what you do is you start distilling the topics discussed with the goal of identifying global themes and patterns within the feedback. Okay, तो goal क्या रहा है? What are they doing? What are they exactly asking for? Right. So using the transcriptions from the previous step, the researcher needs to segment out each conversational area in the user test and categorize them either by product or feature area, interaction or side section, or whatever else is the goal of the research, right? So here the researcher should be looking holistically at the conversational areas, not just at keywords or text fragments, which is why this work can't be done by a computer or AI just yet. Right? So once statements from the feedback are grouped by topic, the researcher should assign a polarity to the statement by classifying the statement or topic as positive or negative. While it sounds easy enough, there is some art to the approach. The researcher needs to be perceptive of the same topic running across multiple sentences. At the same time, he should be savvy enough to break apart statements that span multiple areas and aware of statements that might fit more than one category, right? So, for example, a statement such as "I really like the color scheme," the example given here, but navigation is a nightmare, would actually encompass the two statements, right, in its individuality, right? So he's saying that color scheme अच्छा है, मतलब aesthetic को plus one मिल गया, navigation is a nightmare, navigation minus one मिल गया, right? So these are two separate statements. It is helpful to establish what the categories will be before beginning to categorize statements. Otherwise, your this tagging, this categorization would be all over the place. Correct. So it's very important that you, I mean, it will help you to establish what the categories will be before beginning to categorize the statements. But tweaks to the coding scheme might be required. So as the transcriptions are analyzed, correct. So it can be helpful to divide the statements into parent categories. For example, overall and features. Comments that fit within the overall parent category typically reference product areas that are omnipresent and general in nature. Within the parent category of overall, we use children subcategories such as aesthetics, navigation, layout, and what have you. Comments that fall into a features parent category typically describe specific features of one product. For example, button X or product page Y or copy on page Z or the comment section on some section, for example. The parent category features will typically have more subcategories. Example: product page X, button Y, or modal window Z. Comments generally fall into one parent category, but a measure of flexibility is sometimes required for expansive statements that can apply to multiple areas. Right. So it is a little art meets science kind of a thing. So it's important to maintain flexibility during this step as revisions to categories are sometimes required. As you can imagine, right? You cannot exactly imagine all the categorization right from the beginning. So कुछ categorization करके चालू करो. Once you start going through the feedback, you'll be able to exactly pinpoint कि कहाँ पे aesthetic है, कहाँ पे navigation है, कहाँ पे क्या है. ठीक है? And once this is done, then it's about time to start synthesizing all your data. Right? So the data should be in a much more manageable state now that it has been categorized. At this point, it's merely a matter of aggregating the data by topic area and sentiment polarity. So you can see here visuals got a -8. So you really need a designer now. Layout got 2 and 2, which is pretty meek. Navigation 2, but positive 10, so which is pretty awesome. Aesthetics again 10. Visuals are pathetic. Aesthetics is 10. So you can imagine what is happening here, right? Right. So that to do this, the researchers should set up a table with each of the categories and count the number of positives, which I just indicated. The number of tables that are created will mirror the number of parent categories established during the categorization step. In other words, if there are established parent categories for overall, I've just given an example of overall, and features, then create two tables, one for each parent category. एक features के लिए बनाओ, एक overall के लिए बनाओ. ठीक है? So this will very clearly separate the two sentiments. कि overall sentiment क्या है, features के around sentiment क्या है. The number of rows in those tables will depend on the number of children subcategories. So overall के अंदर था visuals, layout, navigation, aesthetics, for example, right? Um, and this will give you a very good sense of how do you synthesize data across multiple subcategories and overall categories. Correct. Now, once all of this done, it's a very simple exercise of actually visualizing what is happening here. Right. So for data nerds that love Excel and charts, this is easily the best part. A strong visualization can tremendously enhance the data that has been distilled from your transcriptions, especially when conveying user sentiment with a product team. A sentiment score chart. So this is the sentiment score chart. Uh, excels where word clouds fail, not only because of its ability to convey comparative positive or negative emotion, but also because of its ability to visually communicate the magnitude of user response. So सिर्फ ये पता नहीं चल रहा है कि aesthetics अच्छा है, but यही पता चल रहा है कितना अच्छा है. Correct? This ultimately helps researchers identify the more provocative areas of their product. Right? So I think this is pretty simple and straightforward as to how to generate this kind of a chart, right? And this will help you in making exact recommendations basis the entire feedback that you have received, right? So using the sentiment score chart below as an example, our product team, I mean, your product team is able to understand user sentiment with more specificity applied to specific areas. Correct? So in this example, one can see that users responded unanimously positive with 10 comments regarding the aesthetics of the product. Navigation was majority positive and so on. Correct? So basis this, you can exactly get the direction and the magnitude in which you have to apply. So for example, visuals में दिख रहा है कि मुझे बहुत effort डालना पड़ेगा. So maybe we need to have an external consultant or a designer full time to solve this problem. Correct? Next, I want to cover the third distinction. So I've covered attitudinal versus behavioral. I've covered quantitative versus qualitative. Now the third thing is the context of product use, right? So this is how and whether participants in the study are using the product or service in question, correct? So whether they're using in its natural or near natural use, or it's scripted, or they're using in a hybrid state. Okay. So when studying natural use of the product, the goal is to minimize the interference from the study in order to understand behavior or attitudes as close to reality as possible. So this provides greater validity but less control over what topics you learn about. Correct? So you're just observing and nothing else. You're not disturbing the subject directly. Right? Because of this, what you exactly learn and what topics are covered, you do not exactly have a control over it. Correct? So many ethnographic field studies attempt to do this, though there are always some observation bias. Intercept surveys and data mining, don't worry about all this jargons because they will get very clear in the next few slides. So data mining or other analytical techniques are quantitative examples of this. Correct? So surveys or data mining or analytical GA, for example, these are very analytical techniques or quantitative examples of this. Correct? A scripted study of product usage is done in order to focus the insights on specific usage aspects, such as, for example, a newly designed flow. The degree of scripting can vary quite a bit depending on the study goals. So, for example, a benchmarking study is usually very tightly scripted and more quantitative in nature so that it can produce reliable usability metrics. And typically, the way it is done is um, a prospective user would be called into the office or in a lab or a coffee place, and then he or she will be asked to go through the entire site or the section that you are trying to do research on, and speak out loud whatever he's observing and whatever he's thinking. So you can imagine that will be a very scripted thing, but that gives you a good sense of at least you get some direction, right? So studies where the product is not used are conducted to examine issues that are broader than usage and usability, such as study of the brand or larger cultural behaviors. Hybrid methods use a creative form of product usage to meet their goals. So, for example, participatory design methods allow users to interact with and rearrange design elements that could be part of a product experience. Okay. So, for instance, one method is get the user when you're designing a certain layout, for example, you have created the different elements and then you call the user in the studio or in your office and ask them to rearrange the units as per their understanding of where should these elements be placed in the entire layout, right? So these kind of concept testing methods employ a rough approximation of a product or service that gets at the heart of what it would provide. Okay. For example, Dropbox example is padha tha humne, right? That is another method, which is a hybrid testing method. So it is a, all Drew did was create a video, and which was a concept video, correct? And Kickstarter में भी same कहानी होती है. It's a concept video which is launched on Kickstarter, and then people fund or not fund basis how much it intrigues people, correct? So it's a rough approximation of a product, the concept. It's a rough approximation of product or service that gets at the heart of what it would provide, and not at the details of the experience, in order to understand if users would want or need such a product or service. So most of the methods in the chart, which I just showcase here, right? Most of the methods in this chart can move along one or more dimensions, and some do so even in the same study, right? So you will need to do multiple such methods to get a better understanding of your users. And you might have to work with card sorting एक तरफ कर ली and साथ में desirability studies भी कर ली, and then you also did a eye tracking, right? You might have to do multiple things together to get a better sense of your users. Now let's talk about uh, before, like when you're making a distinction, or when you're choosing between which research methodology to use for which uh, for which product. It's also important to understand the phase of a product development and its associated objectives. On the phase में product, remember the PLC, right? So in the beginning phase of product development, which is at the innovation stage, or at the at the very beginning stage, R&D stage, you will typically consider new ideas and opportunities for the future. So you are essentially strategizing, correct? You're essentially strategizing here at the very early stage. Okay. So in this stage, obviously, when you're strategizing, the methods can vary a lot, and the approach can be qualitative as well as quantitative. You'll do anything and everything to get a better strategy in place. So you'll do field studies, you'll do diary studies, you'll do surveys, data mining, analytics. You'll do everything that you can get hands on. Okay. Finally, after doing all this research, you will reach a point of go no go decision point. Remember the stage gate, right? So you'll reach a decision point when you transition into a period when you are actually continually improving the design direction that you have chosen. So you've already picked up a certain design direction basis the initial strategy, initial surveys that you did. So now you already have a certain direction and you want to continuously improve upon it. Correct? So research in this phase is mainly formative and helps you reduce the risk of execution. Okay. So in the goal in this stage is largely to inform and optimize designs in order to reduce risk and improve usability. So in this case, it's largely formative, which is qualitative, right? You're just trying to understand कि जो मैंने design direction लिया है, वो decision हो चुका है. Now let's improve upon it. So that's why you would use qualitative methods like card sorting, field studies, participatory design, paper prototype. ये सब कुछ करोगे आप, ठीक है? And finally, at some point, the product or services will be available for use by enough users so that you can begin measuring how well you're doing. So this is typically summative in nature, that is quantitative in nature. ओके. सो अब सब कुछ हो गया, हमने स्ट्रैटेजी कर ली जिसमें कि इट वाज वाइल्ड ओपन, जो करना था कर लिया आपने, सोचा समझा, you figured out certain direction, then you started executing on that direction, and because you were executing, you just wanted to get better execution in place, and that's why you did a qualitative took a qualitative approach to improve upon your execution. And finally, when you're out with your product, you had a certain prototype ready, then you want to essentially do a quick measurement of your performance against the product itself, against an existing version of the product that you have, or against the competition, right? So this will be mainly quantitative. Okay. Usability benchmarking, you would do online assessments, surveys, A/B testing, and whatnot. Right. This will be all quantitative in nature. Right. So So we go from strategize to execute to assess, and at each stage there's a different goal, there's a different approach, and there's a different method that you can use. So whether it's art or science, as you can imagine by now, that it's a art meets science kind of a thing, right? So while many user experience research methods have their roots in scientific practice, their aims are not purely scientific and still need to be adjusted to meet stakeholders' needs, right? And this is why the characterizations of the methods here are meant as general guidelines. Okay, there's no rigid classification, and you will have to work some with your gut, your experience, uh, right? The success of your work will be determined by how much of an impact it has on improving the user experience of the website or product in question, right? And that's why just remember this, that while I've spoken about a lot of methods, a lot of approaches, um, uh, but it's very important to understand that it's art meets science, and which method you pick for what kind of question. This is where you will shine as a product manager. So enough is enough. Let's talk about 20 user research methods in brief, I'm not going to cover very much in detail because there's plenty of material that is available online. I just want to cover in brief as to what all things that exist, right? So let's understand one by one each one of them. To begin with, usability lab studies, right? We are starting from here. Um, just give me a second. Where's my pointer? Yes. So let's begin with usability lab studies. Usability lab studies, as you can see, it's scripted, right? It falls somewhere in the behavioral and it's qualitative, definitely qualitative in nature, and it falls closer to the behavioral side of things, right? So what happens is participants are brought into a lab one on one with a researcher and given a set of scenarios that lead to tasks and usage of specific interests within a product or service. So to give you an example, let's say you're the product manager of, let's say, phone pay app, or let's say Ixigo app, let's say, for example. So I will call you into the office or into a certain place, and then I'll ask you to search for a flight, and I'll just observe what you're doing. Okay. Then I'll ask you now book a flight. Then I'll ask you check the status of the flight. Then I'll ask you to log out from your profile, and so on. So I'm giving a set of scenarios and which will lead to tasks, and I'll just observe how exactly you're using the app and how you're doing those tasks. That will give me either insights or that'll give me how shitty my product is. Correct. Ethnographic field studies. So इसमें क्या होता है, instead of calling you to the office, I will be actually going to the field and I'll meeting you in your own natural habitats or natural environment. If you are depending on where where is uh, where would you be using the product most likely. So if it's, for example, if you're booking a flight, most likely you'll be booking um, at the on the couch at your home. There's a good chance for that, right? While if you're a B2B product, there's a good chance you'll be using it in your office, right? So wherever your natural environment is for that particular product, I'll reach there, I'll meet you there. Okay. And then I will ask you questions and I'll ask you to do certain things in, I mean, I'll not exactly ask you, but I'll just let you use the product in whatever way you are using, and I'll just observe it right there. Okay. That is ethnographic field studies. Then participated design, which is this, which is it's a hybrid, it's a combination. So participants are given design elements or creative materials in order to construct their ideal experience in a concrete way. Okay, like I said earlier. So for example, either I will get to your office or you will come to my office, and I will give you certain elements. Okay, let's say now this kind of research could be purely user experience driven, that is an interface driven, or it could be about the entire experience of let's say for example let's say policy bazaar kind of a thing, where or a car dekho, where you're buying a car. So it could be designing the entire experience, the entire journey of finding, discovering a good used car. For example, if you're buying a used car from car dekho, so it has multiple steps, right? Firstly, discovery of the car itself. So how do you search? How do you filter? Um that is one. Second is how do you bookmark or how do you select? Third is how do you call and talk to the sellers and get a little more detail? Then how do you shortlist? Then after shortlisting, how do you reach out to the sellers and figure out the scheduling and appointment and so on? And then when you reach there, how do you let Car Dekho know, or how will Car Dekho know that they have led to a car getting booked or being bought? Correct. So it could be a multimodal kind of an experience where it's just not an app experience; it's a offline plus online experience, or it could be pure app experience. For example, you are it's a pure tech play. For example. Paytm's payment options, right? It's an entirely online flow. So user can be called into the office, or I will reach to their office and I'll give you the design elements, which could be simple, sticky notes with the elements written. यहाँ पे ये step one है, step two है, step three है. I'll not exactly mention step one, but I'll just mention कि यहाँ पे ये हो रहा है, यहाँ पे ये हो रहा है, यहाँ पे ये हो रहा है. And then I'll ask the user to just put them together in the best way possible, in the way that he believes reasonable. Okay, so that is participated design. We are We are designing by allowing people to participate, the end users to participate. Then comes focus groups. So focus groups में होता है, I think this is pretty well known. So groups of 3 to 12 participants are led through a discussion about a set of topics, and then you have to give a verbal and written feedback or just verbal feedback through discussion exercises कि ये अच्छा लगा, ये अच्छा नहीं लगा, ये बुरा है, इसको ऐसे कर सकते हैं, इसको ऐसा कर सकते हैं, and so on. So focus groups have a divided audience, to be very honest. A lot of people hate it, and a lot of people love it. So it's a mixed bag. I have not done focus group ever. I mean, I've just participated in one focus group that was happening. I have never done it myself. Uh, and finally, interviews. This is like the this is like interviews is the the hammer that you have that you can use all the time. It's not a silver bullet, but it works most of the time. बहुत सिंपल है, वन ऑन वन डिस्कशन होता है एंड इन डेप्थ डिस्कशन होता है जस्ट टू अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट द पार्टिसिपेंट इज थिंकिंग. Right, so I will ask you, I'll show you different product approaches, designs, interfaces, or simply the entire experience, and I'll ask you specific questions. Now this questions, what kind of questions to be asked, I will discuss just this, like there's a whole section dedicated to just how do you ask the right questions in interviews. I'll explain that in very soon. Moving on. Then eye tracking. Now eye tracking is a little invasive, as you can imagine. So eye tracking can happen in the natural habitat as well, where the user doesn't know that his eye is getting tracked. Yes, that also happens. Or it can also be done in a lab scenario where the user is called into the office, and a special eye tracking software is or hardware plus devices configured to just track where the user is going. ठीक है, जिससे ये समझ में आता है कि how exactly the user is inferring uh, our entire layout. Okay. uh, so close to eye tracking is heat mapping. Okay, very close to it is heat mapping, because obviously I will not have eye tracking device all the time which I can use, right? So heat mapping is a little better tool, because heat mapping में क्या होता है कि where the user is exactly clicking, not clicking, maximum number of users are clicking, that gives me a certain sense of what is the thing that people are liking the most or not liking at all or completely ignoring on a certain site. Correct. So that is a proxy for eye tracking basically, and that gives you a very good idea about how people are behaving. Right. So this is eye tracking. Then comes usability benchmarking. So it's a very tightly scripted usability studies which are performed with several participants, and एकदम precise होता है. यूजिबिलिटी स्टडीज बेंचमार्किंग इसी का बहुत एक्सपेंसिव भी होता है, that's why a lot of people don't do it unless we're talking about very large firms. So इसमें there's a precise script. A lot of people are called into the office and all of them are asked to do the same thing in the exact same manner, and then it is seen that how exactly people are behaving or reacting to it. So for example, सबको बोला गया कि जाओ सर्च करो फ्लाइट. Okay, so some people, for example, my mother versus me versus my brother versus my friend is going to perform it very differently depending on where we are coming from. So my mother might find it very difficult to actually search a flight on the site, but me or my friend who might be from a very small village who has never used this might find it very difficult. But me, because I'm a slightly advanced user of such interfaces, I might be able to immediately figure out even a complex interface and get done with it. Right. So that indicates, that helps in identifying exact usability problems. But as you can imagine, it's slightly expensive and slightly more difficult to conduct. Then comes moderated remote usability studies. ये सारे के सारे यूज होते हैं. ओके, डोंट थिंक कि ये सारे यूज नहीं होते होंगे, सिर्फ जीए है एंड इंटरव्यूज है, नहीं, ये सारे यूज होते हैं depending on what exactly are you dealing with, and that's why it's very important for you to know the lay of the land. So usability studies conducted remotely. अब सब कुछ बुला नहीं सकते हो, so you will conduct it remotely. So screen sharing करोगे या remote control use करोगे, जिससे कि you will conduct the usability studies. So similar to what the previous one, except this one is it is moderated in a remote environment. Okay. Then unmoderated remote panel studies. Simply क्या होता है कि a panel of trained participants who have video recording and data collection software installed on their own personal devices uses a website or product while thinking aloud. I mentioned this some time back, right? तो वीडियो रिकॉर्ड किया जाता है while the user is using the product. Okay, and while they're using the product, they're also thinking aloud. कि अच्छा मुझे ये भी दिख रहा है. I'm not liking this button. This button is too loud. It's taking my entire attention. Plus, I hate the color of this. It's salmon color. Why do people use salmon color? It's a red color. Red color is not good for clicking. I don't want to click on this thing. But there is nothing else I can do, so I'm going to click on this. So people start talking like this, like a maniac, and that experience is recorded, and then that is used by the researcher or whoever is working on it. Okay, then comes concept testing. Now, concept testing comes in all sort of forms and figures. One of the most common is videos. Dropbox case, for example, you know this, right? So, approximation of the product is used. Now, that approximation could be anything, okay, and it should capture the key essence, the value proposition of a new concept or product in order to determine if it meets the need of the target audience. Remember that discussion that Ajay had, and he showed an MVP where he, before getting to the car, he the builder, the developer, built a skateboard. So skateboard becomes the approximation of a car. So it helps you getting from point A to point B. Correct. And this can be done on a one-to-one basis or with larger number of participants, and either in person or online. So there is concept testing is a whole wide world. You can do practically anything that can give you a better sense of what people are going to like or not like before you actually end up building it. Okay. Then comes diary and camera studies. So so participants are largely given a mechanism, that is a diary or a camera. So diary से basic diary मतलब कि diary and pen just to record what they're doing, versus camera just to record in a visual manner, right? So they need to describe aspects of their lives that are relevant to a product or service, okay, or simply quote to the target audience. So diary studies are typically longitudinal and can only be done for data that is easily recorded by participants, right? So customer feedback. I'm sorry, this slightly मैं थोड़ा सा कॉपी यहाँ लिखने में थोड़ा गलती कर दी है. I'll just cover it. I'll just cover the customer feedback also here, and then I'll correct it in the slide later. So customer feedback, similarly, so in diary and camera studies, basically, you are largely covering whatever aspects that are relevant to the product at that point of time. So, for example, if let's talk about something else now. Um, uh, let's talk about the hotel booking app, booking.com, right? So you're going to largely talk about, you're just going to record कि मुझे, when I'm booking a hotel, these are the things I like to look up for. I like to see large images. I like to see the ratings. I like to see the room ki photos. I also like to see what others are talking about it, and so on, right? So that is what you are largely noting down or just simply recording. Next point is customer feedback, which is this method. It's open-ended or close-ended information provided by a self-selected sample of users. So basically, you're taking a survey. For example, after, and you would have done this a number of times, right? You would have received an email from Make My Trip or from someone asking, "भाई आपको कैसा लगे service?" And then you can either choose to give a solid feedback, or even restaurants nowadays, right? They will come back with a paper which will have feedback, a questionnaire which you can fill up and submit. Correct. That is customer feedback. It's open-ended completely, or close-ended depending on scenario to scenario, and it's self-selected. So users can obviously choose not to give the feedback, and sometimes they can choose to give feedback. The only problem which I've personally seen in customer feedback is most of the people only give feedback when they are when they want to give a negative feedback. Okay, or they're exemplary excited about the product, that they're completely blown away. Okay, so that's why the feedback that you will typically receive would be largely negative, and very occasionally very heavily positive. Neutral feedbacks बहुत कम मिलते हैं. Then comes desirability studies, right? So इसमें क्या होता है, participants are offered different visual design alternatives, and this time I'm just talking about visual interfaces. Okay, and I expected to associate each alternative with a set of attributes selected from a closed list, right? So एक visual design दिखा दिया. Now if it's a website, obviously that, but if it's a physical product, I can show you different physical variants, right? ये अच्छा लग रहा है, ये अच्छा लग रहा है, ये अच्छा लग रहा है, and so on. And then you are asked कि okay, अगर तुम्हें ये अच्छा लग रहा है तो इसके what is the closest term or closest word that you can associate with? Is it happy? Is it sad? Is it satisfying? It is calm, right? So some attribute that you can connect with, and you are given a closed list. It's not an open list. You can pick any term. नहीं. Out of this 5 words, out of this 10 words, what do you think this particular design or this particular variant you can closely relate with? So this particular design is giving me very calm feeling. So I'll connect the term calm with this particular design. Okay, and these studies can be both quantitative or qualitative. So you can also give ki, on a scale of 1 to 10, how calm are you feeling? I'm feeling. I'll give it a rating of 10. So that becomes a quantitative measure of the desirability. Okay. Then comes card sorting. I've already explained it. Essentially, it helps in understanding how your users look at the information that you're providing. How exactly are they putting things together? And that also gives you an idea of the mental model that the users associate with. And you would want to have you would want to build the products around, or the information architecture on your website around the mental model of the person. So if the person believes that an X category should go with a Y category, then you put them together, although your logical mind believes that no, these are two completely different things and we should not club them together. But if the user is saying so, maybe you need to let the user be the king, right? And this card sorting method is largely used for information architecture, or to put things, for example, on homepage. अब homepage पे ऊपर कौन सी category, for example, on app of Flipkart or Paytm, there are n number of categories that show up, right? There are rows that show up. So कौन सा ऊपर जाएगा, कौन सा नीचे जाएगा? This can be done using card sorting in one way. तो मुझे तो मैं चाहूँगा कि फैशन ऊपर जाना चाहिए, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक आइटम नीचे आनी चाहिए. नहीं नहीं, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक भेजो और नीचे भेजो, मोबाइल ऊपर भेजो, बिकॉज मोबाइल इज समथिंग विच आई वुड लाइक टू क्विकली सी, राइट? सो कार्ड सॉर्टिंग कैन गिव यू अ गुड आइडिया ऑफ हाउ पीपल see things to be arranged. Okay. Then comes our favorite, and all of us would have used this, clickstream analysis, right? So clickstream analysis का best example है Google Analytics, right? So it analyzes a record of screens or pages that user clicks on and sees as they use a site or software product, right? It requires the site to be instrumented properly, or the application to have telemetry data collection enabled, which is nothing but essentially what Google Analytics does, right? All the clicks on the website are collected, stored, and then they are processed to figure out कौन से actions लिए गए, कौन से actions नहीं लिए गए, क्या हुआ, क्या नहीं हुआ, and so on. Then comes A/B testing. It's also known as multivariate testing or live testing. Multivariate comes from multivariable testing. Okay, so it's a basically what you're doing is scientifically testing. Because I said scientifically because you'll very accurately figure out मुझे कौन-कौन से variables के against test करना है. Okay, मुझे ये टेस्ट करना है कि बटन का कलर कौन सा यूज करना है, फॉर एग्जांपल, या फिर बटन की प्लेसमेंट क्या करनी है. सो आई एम गोइंग टू यू नो test against just one variable typically. And if you're going to test against two variables, then obviously उतने permutations बना के test करूँगा. So unless and until you have very very large audience, you can imagine that if you're conducting, uh, you know, let's say you have just audience of 1,000 people, then maybe A/B testing of against one variable will make sense because you will get about 500 users on for both the variants. Correct? If you're opening the entire A/B testing for the entire audience. But if you have, let's say, 1 million users and you're opening in the A/B testing only for, let's say, 10% of your users, you're getting about 100,000 users, which is a sizable audience. So now in sizable audience, now you can test against. You can create maybe 5 variants and test again and give good enough traffic to all of your variants, right? So without giving good enough data to all your variants, you will never be able to get statistically significant data. Okay, for example, for this course, the landing page, I was doing A/B testing continuously, and I had tested almost 8 different variants. Uh, and against this, finally, I figured out which variant was working the best. Uh, basis the basis not just कि कौन कितना click कर रहा था, कौन कितना convert कर रहा था, but also what is the confidence uh, behind this variance. इसको statistically significant data बोलते हैं. Look it up. It's very very important. Slightly out of the scope, so again I'm not covering right now. Then comes unmoderated UX studies. Okay, so it's a quantitative or qualitative and automated method. तो स्पेशलाइज रिसर्च टूल होता है टू कैप्चर द पार्टिसिपेंट बिहेवियर थ्रू सॉफ्टवेयर इंस्टॉल्ड ऑन पार्टिसिपेंट कंप्यूटर एंड एटीट्यूड्स थ्रू एम्बेडेड सर्वे क्वेश्चंस, राइट. सो बेसिकली अनमॉडरेटेड होगा, आपको एक स्पेसिफिक स्क्रिप्ट के थ्रू लेके जाएंगे and we will be asking you to do exactly specific things one by one, but it's completely automated, completely remote as compared to the moderated remote usability studies. यहाँ पे completely automated होता है. Okay? Then comes true intent studies. इसमें क्या करते हैं कि so a random user will be picked and he'll be asked कि, what is your goal or intention to enter the site. He will say, I want to discover a flight or I want to book a flight, and then you see what is their subsequent behavior. Okay, and when they're about to exit the site or they have already exited, if you have access to them post the exit, then you'll ask whether they were successful in achieving their goal. So using this, you get to understand the true intent of the users. Okay, and finally, finally, an intercept survey, which is you would have seen, right? When you're using a website, suddenly a survey pops up saying that are you liking the website or did you find what you're looking for, right? Those are all intercept surveys, and they are used to get some sort of data, uh, largely attitudinal data about why a person is using the website. And finally, an email survey, which is nothing but a participant is sent an email message to give a survey. Nothing special here, right? So this is all 20 methods that exist. Okay, quite a long chain, but it's very important that you get used to or get comfortable with what is what, and know कि कौन सी चीज कहाँ use होती है. It's pretty much like if you're a plumber, these are all the different tools that you need. Obviously, most of the time you will be using the hammer and the chisel most of the time, but you also need to know your specialized tools from time to time because some of your products might need that specialized tools. Okay. uh, I have also created a quick map as to कब कार्ड सॉर्टिंग कब कहाँ काम आएगी. सो नोइंग योर यूजर में काम आएगी कार्ड सॉर्टिंग, कंटेंट डिजाइन में काम आएगी, बट डिजाइनिंग में काम नहीं आएगी बिकॉज कार्ड सॉर्टिंग इज जस्ट इंफॉर्मेशन डिजाइन, इट डजंट गिव यू डिजाइन or aesthetic scenario. But you can imagine the first click testing would definitely give you this, but no idea about your user. Correct? So I've given you a 3 slide long chart. Please have a look. You don't have to memorize it, but yeah, get a sense or get a feel for it as to what is usable where. Okay. Now you can see the surveys because surveys are usable across the board, right? Know your user, content, design, test, and refine. That's how surveys are so popular, and that's why there are survey-specific product companies. So SurveyMonkey or Typeform or Google Forms, right? They all got so popular because surveys are everywhere. Right? Okay, so now we have covered two topics. I'll take a break and I will stop the video for now. I'll upload the second version in some time, or I'll upload the second version in separate video.